The carrot and the stick. That was the plan for Susan. Jonathan got the hints for the carrot from the eagle's wives. It makes sense that a trio of 70-year-old women should know a thing or two about how the female mind works. Obviously, I haven't guessed anything, he thought. Susan had been out of sorts after he'd shaken up her day, and quite deliberately at that. He decided to deal with the kids and give her some quiet time. Eventually, he put them to bed, although Cindy, having become a big girl, fought to stay up until 9 o'clock. He compromised by letting her stay up until 9:15 to break up the conversation and perhaps assuage a little of his guilt about being gone for 2 days. As the house grew quieter, he heard Susan talking on the phone. Perhaps it was a lover, or maybe a friend or two she confided in. He didn't know. At that moment, he didn't care. Jonathan opened a bottle of wine and selected 2 crystal glasses for them. He knocked on the bedroom door and waited a little while for her to finish talking. Eventually, she opened the door and looked at him sadly. "You don't have to knock. It's your bedroom," she said softly. He walked past her and placed the tray on the bedside table. He remembered how she had closed the door in front of him a few nights ago. His bedroom. Right. "I didn't want to disturb you on the phone," he explained. "That? It was my sister Jenny. She wanted to know what was going on. Everyone's talking, you know. You've really made a mess of things." He hadn't started anything. She was the one cheating. Now was not the time to remind her of that. He poured her a glass, stood up and put it in her hand. "It's been a rough week, hasn't it?" He wanted her to open up, to start talking. He listened as long as he could. She nodded. "Terrible. I never wanted this, Jonathan. I thought things could be the old way, not the way it is now. Why do you make everything so complicated?" He refilled his glass and patted the bed beside him. "Come on, sit next to me. Let's have a conversation. Calmly, politely. I still love you, baby." She climbed onto the bed, her shirt pulled up over her hips as she sat cross-legged, facing him. "Talk? No yelling? No accusations?" He reached out and stroked her bare knee. "Yes, let's talk. What went wrong, Susan? How did I let you down, that you needed to find what you were missing in the arms of another man?" The ice around her heart began to melt. He cared. "It's complicated, darling. I love you. I've never stopped loving you. Please tell me you believe that." "Of course I believe it," he said, barely able to keep from lying. "Would we be here if I didn't believe it? It wasn't supposed to happen. It was just a series of little events that kept piling up. I talked to him at a party, and he was so sad and depressed about his life that I tried to comfort him. The first time I made him smile was a huge success. The first tentative laugh was an even bigger success. I felt so good, like what I was doing mattered." She looked nervously at her husband, and he only nodded. "It's wrong, I know, but I'm tired of just being a mom and a housewife. My days have become a dull repetition. Taking care of a toddler, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old, I never made time for myself. You were so busy all the time." "I know, God, Jonathan, it hurts me to say this. I know you did it for us, for me, for the kids, for the family, but all you did was work and come home exhausted, and I felt unloved, like you didn't care about me. I was just a babysitter and a housekeeper." Jonathan analyzed the advice older women gave him. Don't argue about what she feels is right or wrong. Allow her to come to the right conclusions on her own. Gently steer her in the right direction. Allow her to shift some of the blame onto him. Accept it, and she will feel even more guilty. "I'm sorry, baby. I had to see that. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week is very tiring when you have a physical job like I do. It's no excuse that nothing happened between us. I appreciated everything you did, even though I may not have said it." She shook her head, eyes sparkling. "I know it wasn't your fault. I could talk to you more about it. But it was like you were slipping away. You didn't have time for me, for us. You started drinking more. It seemed like you were always sitting on that couch with a beer in your hand." I started to hate that damn couch and the TV. You always had time for them, but not for me. Jonathan let her talk it out. I'm often under a lot of stress. This was my way of trying to relieve the stress. I didn't want you to feel the pressure I felt. We were letting people go, and there was more and more work, and the schedule was tight. I should have talked to you about it instead of keeping it all to myself. She snorted and wiped her eyes. I was bored, and it became my project. It was everything from the beginning. For a whole year, nothing happened. I didn't perceive him that way, I swear. I enjoyed helping him, watching him slowly pick himself up. I felt useful, which is exactly what I needed. That was our whole problem. It was never about a lack of affection, or our lovemaking, or me falling out of love with you. I never stopped loving you. I did what gave me pleasure, and I was proud of it. I wasn't doing anything wrong, except maybe spending too much time with another man, but it wasn't romantic. It was like a job, which I was good at. I understand how it could have happened. Everyone needs to feel good about themselves. I hoped that being a wonderful mother and an amazing wife would help me do that. I realized that you weren't getting from us what you were getting from him. Jonathan was finding it increasingly difficult to keep up the pretense. She hadn't done anything wrong. Then why had she been hiding it for a year? She finished her wine and Jonathan refilled her glass. She took a long sip gratefully. It all happened so fast, I wasn't prepared for it. It was slow going at first. A few phone calls, a few meetings over lunch, or sitting together over a cup of coffee. We talked. Talked like we didn't talk to each other anymore. He was easy to talk to. He wanted to go out to dinner, but I couldn't. I was a married woman. There's a difference between lunch and dinner. I offered to cook him a meal. At first, it was a little strange being in an unfamiliar kitchen, not knowing where anything was. A little anxious, to be honest. But I didn't have any romantic feelings. He was just a friend. Jonathan refilled his glass. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't need a detailed story. He just wanted her to tell him what was so wrong with their marriage that she had to spend a year having fun with another man. Not this withering monologue about friendship. Men don't need women as friends. He knew the nasty bastard had intended to get into his wife's pants from the start. He wanted to shake her up and explain everything to her. Make her understand. To play the poor sorry man, to play on her maternal instincts. Instead, he tried to remain calm, nodding occasionally. After that, it was easier for us to go to his house than in public. It was private there, and we could talk more openly. Besides, I didn't want anyone to have any thoughts about us. We were just friends. She looked at him hopefully, hoping he would understand her. Go on, Jonathan said. It felt so good to be able to talk. Of course he would understand now. That was all they needed. A little time for him to recover from the shock, for his male ego to take a back seat. Once he realized the reason, everything would be fine. I used to help him around the house. He was so disorganized. Did a little bit of cleaning. Helped put things away. After his wife's accident, he let things go. We talked more. We could talk about anything. Sometimes we talked about our wants and needs. Then more about our desires, our fantasies. About what we were doing or wanted to do. It was about communication. Spending time together. Understanding. He seduced you, Jonathan mumbled, not wanting to say the words. She looked surprised. No, never. He was a friend. Someone who needed me and who needed me. Good friends can talk about things like that. That's just it. He's not like that. Jonathan bit his lip, waiting. If he opened his mouth, all the night's efforts would go to waste. He tipped the bottle over and poured into her glass. It just happened. I was in the kitchen and then we started kissing. I know I should have stopped it, but it was a kiss between friends. And then all of a sudden we stopped. I don't even know how I ended up in his bedroom. Her hand shook as she sipped her wine. She looked up at him and he saw tears in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt awful. I came home and showered and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, but I never got myself cleaned up. I had cheated the only time in my marriage and I hated myself for it. I knew you would see it in my eyes, but all you did was grab a beer and sit on the couch. You didn't question me. You didn't see the guilt. I wondered if you cared. She drank half her wine. I tried to end it. He called and I asked him to stop. I avoided him, didn't go where we used to go. I swore to myself that I would never do anything like that again and make it up to you. Then I heard he ended up in the hospital from an overdose of sleeping pills, and I realized it was because of me. I almost killed him. I went to him to help him, but we promised each other it would never happen again. I'm so sorry, Jonathan. I tried to stop it. I swear I tried. I felt so bad seeing him slip away again. Jonathan was furious. At his stupid, gullible wife and at this vile predator. An overdose, he thought. A few pills, a call to the hospital, and she was back with him, though she resisted his efforts. Lousy bastard. Jonathan took the empty glass from her and set it on the bedside table. She sobbed, and he pulled her to him and hugged her. If only she had spoken then, all of this could have been avoided. He could have forgiven her for one stupid mistake. He was sure he could. But a year of adultery? Demanding that she be allowed to continue dating that scumbag? Threaten him? No, he couldn't accept that. She would pay. They would both pay. He led her over to the bed. Love me, Jonathan. Please. It's been too long, she whispered. No, baby. I won't be second best to him. I can't do this. She reached for him. You'll never be second. I love you. You're my husband. You're first. He's second. My nights are yours. It's always been that way. You spent 2 nights in his bed. I have no doubt that as soon as I leave for work, you'll be having fun with him again. I have a few minutes with you, but he could spend all his time with you, spoiling you, telling you how wonderful you are, stealing you away from me. I can't do that. Honey, this hasn't been a problem for over a year. You don't even need to know. When I'm here with you, I'm only yours. He tried. Damn how hard he tried. The words were like knives digging into him. He let go of her and rolled onto his side. Goddamn whore. I married a goddamn cheating whore. Susan didn't understand, couldn't comprehend what had just happened. He was so good, so loving, so understanding. And then suddenly he'd become so withdrawn. Why couldn't he just love her? Nothing had changed. She moved closer to him. What if she'd stopped then? After that first time. She sighed. It was too late now. She had to make him understand. Nothing would change. Things could be okay again. Maybe even wonderful, like it had been in the beginning. Please, Jonathan, she whispered. I'm here for you. I'll always be by your side. Never again as long as you're with him, Jonathan said coldly and rolled off her onto his stomach. Susan turned away from him, feeling the pain of rejection. She didn't even try to hold back her tears as she fell asleep. Next chapter. The next morning, Jonathan was up bright and early. It was the dawn of a new day, and he no longer felt out of control. He told his wife and her lover about their behavior and insisted that it stop. With the help of family and friends, he began to take action to put an end to it. This included quitting his old job and returning to work on the family ranch. It also meant early hours. Susan was still lounging in bed when he went downstairs for a quick breakfast. He wondered if she had run off that afternoon to have fun with her boyfriend. At the ranch, Uncle Len introduced him to people, most of whom he already knew. He was told of his duties and put in charge of old Miguel, who had been with the family for a good 20 years. Uncle Len told him to come to the house for his lunch break. A large table was set there, and he smiled when he saw his grandfather and friends waiting for him. He quickly, within 10 minutes, told them about the past weekend, the conversation with his mother and his wife's family. He talked about his visit to the casino, keeping silent about the female companionship he had found. He analyzed his actions with his wife and the confrontation with the bastard. The grandfather spoke when he was done. You should know that the Gray Brigade is making this their personal project. The Gray Brigade? Asked Jonathan. The colonel replied, A center for senior citizens. All retired people. A little thrill in their lives. If that little slut keeps this up, she'll hear about it again. That's for sure. Madge Johnson lives across the street, a couple houses down from that bastard, Carl Jenkins said. Her daughter works at my store. She'll keep an eye on the house. If anyone comes or goes, Madge and her sister will know about it. The judge laughed. Her parents will get an earful, too. So sad to hear what kind of woman your daughter turned out to be. Is that why your other daughter left? I'm glad I'm not on their bad side. You need to talk to the bank, John. Take all your contact information to my house. When you get behind on your payments, we don't need them calling your house and your whore wife finding out, his grandfather said. The judge pulled out some papers. Guy's wife, a dead woman. Her name was Heather. I've got some pictures of her. Buried in a Methodist cemetery. Pretty ugly. He was thrown from the car, she was stuck inside. She could have been killed on impact, but the car caught fire, and she was burned to the point where she was barely recognizable. The lawsuit he won had to do with just that. The car had a history of catching fire in accidents. Jonathan nodded. Good information to work with. Thank you, sir. No problem. We'll take care of ourselves. He had his own instructions, hot and cold to his wife. Start a program against the bastard. Continue to protect the assets. Transfer all financial contacts to Grandpa's house. By the end of the day, Jonathan was sore in places he didn't even realize he was sore. It was nice to work outdoors and be around old friends. He went home, cleaned himself up, and started his second job. His wife. Next chapter. That night, Rich Patton got a call from a blocked number. Hello? It stings, Richie. How could you let me burn like this? It hurts so bad. A trembling female voice whispered. He remembered lying on the hard pavement and looking at the car engulfed in flames with his young wife still in it. He dropped the phone, and the words resurrected the pain in his mind. Screamed a voice on the other end of the line, still audible from where he stood. Next chapter. No, you can't bring the kids in here for us to watch, Brenda snapped angrily. But Mom, I have to go out, Susan said. Take your kids with you. They're your damn kids, Susan. Things take a lot longer with 3 kids, she explained. What else are you supposed to do? It's not like you don't have a job and you don't do much around the house anyway. Are you going to run off to that bastard you're having fun with? Her mother grinned. He's not a bastard. He's a good man. You don't understand. I understand that he's a lowlife who entertains another man's wife. God, you're such a disappointment to your father and me. We can't even walk through town without someone reminding us what a whore you've become. Mom, how could you say that? Drop that bastard and crawl back to your husband. Beg for his forgiveness. Maybe it's not to save your marriage. I didn't do anything wrong, Susan objected. He's the one who should be apologizing to me. She was shocked to hear only a busy hum on the other end of the line. Next chapter. Max Schritter sat at the table and addressed the crowd. They were sitting in a card room in the senior center. The door was closed. There were more women than men, but everyone understood the situation. They had already assigned duties. The phone lines would be running until well into the night. The first pass brought the Gray Brigade up to speed. The second pass was to begin to put pressure on the next generation, to make it clear what was acceptable behavior and what was not. In a few days, the whole town would know about it. Treason wasn't the issue. It happened. Hell, there's probably more than half the group that's had a slip-up or two. Maybe more than a few times. But the blatant disrespect, expecting a spouse to put up with an ongoing affair, expecting her to abandon her family, expecting her to be able to keep the rest of her life, family and friends, was too much. No, they agreed. It was inexcusable behavior on the part of both cheating spouses. Make up or break up, but not like this. Disgusting. Generation Me. They would be reminded of it, rebuked, insulted, and judged wherever they went. No, this behavior could not be allowed to spread. Duties were assigned, tasks were set, options were discussed and weighed. When the room was nearly empty, the colonel sat down with his 5 aides. This is the most unpleasant part. Do we all realize what's involved? The risk? All of his life mates agreed. They were up to the task. John Kroom took the lead. Copies of his house keys were handed out. Straight from his wife's keychain, into Jenkins's control room, and then into the hands of the criminals. Photos, articles, documents, love letters, anything they could gather. Step 1 is to get more information. They'll be notified when he leaves the house. Gray's network will keep tabs on him. Once they determine the right moment, the first hack will happen and they will gather as much information as possible. Only then will the guilt campaign go into full gear. A couple of them felt slightly uneasy about what they were about to do, but not enough to stop them. Next chapter. Susan parked in the garage and quickly closed the door behind her. She took off her hat and sunglasses, embarrassed at her disguise. This was ridiculous. She had every right to see Rich. She entered the house through the garage and readily accepted his embrace. They didn't talk about anything but missing each other as they walked to his bedroom and quickly undressed before collapsing on the bed together. Half an hour and 2 sessions later, he stood up and stared at her. How did you screw this up? No one at the firm even wants to talk to me. Susan was stunned at his accusation. How had she ruined everything? He had used her to get off, not even caring about her satisfaction after the nights she had given him. She'd faced her husband alone, faced his anger and accusations. And now it was her fault? You wanted to stop hiding. You wanted sleepovers. It was your idea to tell him, to force him to accept us, to threaten divorce and children. How the hell did that become everyone's idea? He snapped back. I don't. Gossip. He told his family and mine. They still barely talk to me. The rumors must have spread. You were supposed to keep it a secret, just between the two of you. How did he know it was me? Where do I live? Rich was beyond angry. How the hell should I know? I talked to him like we agreed. Told him how it was. You're a man. You should have known how he'd react. I'm not some Neanderthal who can't hold his woman. Do I have to remove half my brain to think like him? Susan could barely believe his words. The disrespect, the anger. Where was this coming from? She started to pull on her clothes before she said something she would regret later. Rich reached for her. Where are you going? We're not done yet. You just got here. It's been a week since we've been together. You shouldn't talk about Jonathan like that. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's a good man. We're the ones who want to change the rules. A good man? Spreads rumors and gossip about us? Ignores you, disrespects you? What good is that? Snapped Rich, stepping between her and the door. I've got to go. I'm going to be late. He motioned toward her, pulling her to him. What about us, Susie Q? I miss you. We need to spend some time together. Tell him you'll spend the night here. He already knows. We need to reconnect. You're everything to me. You know how much I love you. I can't bear to go a few days without you. I need you. She listened to his pleas, realizing it was true. Without her, he would quickly go back to his old life. She took his face in her hands and kissed him gently. We'll work something out. No sleepovers? What am I going to tell the kids? You'll put them on your parents again. She sighed. It'll be a cold day in hell before they watch them again. They've made that clear. She started to pull away, but he pressed himself against her, needing help. Come back after they're asleep. I need to feel you in my arms again when I fall asleep. Don't you want that? She nodded, but if she were honest with herself, she would admit that she hated being separated from her children at night. She didn't sleep well at Rich's house. She smiled to herself. She didn't sleep much at all, come to think of it. Next chapter. Max answered Madge's call. The slut had spent almost 2 hours with him, sneaking around like a night thief. He called his daughter and berated her. What the hell were you thinking, Carolyn? Watching the kids while she went out to have fun? She said she was looking for a job, been collecting questionnaires. And you believe that lying whore after all she'd done? Carolyn wasn't happy when Susan showed up at her door 20 minutes late. She helped gather the children and put them in the car. Before Susan could leave, Carolyn grabbed her arm. Never again, you lying whore! Using me to cover your ass while you have fun with my son? Susan flinched at the harsh words. I didn't. Save the lies for someone else. You stink. You could at least clean yourself up before you take my grandchildren. What the hell is wrong with you? In the battle of shame and anger, anger won. If you don't want to see the kids, that's fine with me. I haven't done anything wrong. You'll never have to look at them again. You'll be lucky if you get to see them. Susan pulled back as Carolyn's hand ran down her face. He's right. You're just a slut. Next chapter. Jonathan sat with his grandfather after a long, hard day. The last thing he wanted to hear about was his wife abusing him. I don't want to know, Grandpa. Frankly, I don't care. She asked your mother to watch the kids. Said she was putting together job applications or some other nonsense. Jonathan was seized with anger and his hands shook. No one watches my kids unless I say they can. No one. Not you, not Mom, not even the neighbor's babysitter. Don't blame your mother for this. She was trying to do the right thing. She has a right to see her grandchildren. I don't blame her. That's a lying whore under my roof. I'll talk to my mom myself. Next chapter. Mom, what is Jezebel? Asked Cindy. What? What? Asked Susan, surprised at her eldest's words. Dana's grandmother said you're Jezebel. Susan felt her blood pressure rising. She had no right. That old bitch had no right to talk to her daughter like that. It's okay, baby. That's what old people say. But not in front of her daughter, if she could help it. No more dates with Dana. That was for sure. Next chapter. Rich ignored the stares and whispers as he entered his old employer's office. It was helpful to keep the relationship going, and his monthly lunch outing was one way to do it. He waited patiently in the lobby. After 20 minutes, he realized something was wrong. As each new person stepped off the elevator, he noticed the stares, the whispers. No one was making eye contact. Something was wrong. He called out. Jean? I'm in the lobby. We're having lunch, he said. There was silence on the other end. I don't think I can make it today. Has something happened? I haven't seen Eric or Dan. It's just not a good idea right now. Things are kind of hectic. Maybe some other time sometime. I'm really busy. I have to go. Rich listened to the silence on the other end of the line. A quick call to Eric didn't yield anything better. Eric, we've had a standing lunch meeting for 2 years now? What's going on? The man could hear the anger in his voice. Your girlfriend? You led us to believe you were serious, that you were engaged. You never told us she was married and had 3 kids. You used us to cover yourself. Now we all feel like idiots. My wife would kill me if I went to dinner with you. No, I don't think we'll be going to lunch anytime soon. He looked up from the phone, feeling a steady gaze on him. He headed for the revolving glass door, blending into the crowd exiting the building. A year. She's married. He heard a whisper ahead of him. Cake and has it too. 3 kids. From behind him. 2 million for killing his wife, echoed in his ears as he hurried down the sidewalk. Next chapter. The end of summer was a rough time on the ranch. From dawn to dusk, checking hedges, working on irrigation, moving herds from pasture to pasture. It was almost time for the second hay cutting, which was going on at a great pace as long as the weather held. Uncle Len was still largely following the traditions of Grandpa Max. The ranch became largely mechanized, with pickup trucks replacing horses on many jobs. The Schritters still adhered to the practice of driving as little as possible in short distances. Gasoline cost money. Most of the work had to be done on horseback, especially when they had to move herds and check pastures. Jonathan had forgotten how exhausting it is to ride a horse for 10 hours a day. How tiring it was to carry 40-pound backpacks, dig trenches, and change fence posts. He looked forward to haying, which mostly consisted of traveling. Most of the ranch workers were laborers by necessity. The standard motto on the ranch was, "If it's broken, fix it." His expertise with cars, engines, and anything mechanical was almost revered. The ranch didn't send cars to work. If something broke, Jonathan could fix it. He may not have been skilled on the range, awkwardly herding hobos, but his mechanical ability and willingness to do whatever it took was admired by his fellow ranchers. He enjoyed it. Every evening he returned home tired, sore, and hungry, but he could not recall being so pleased with his accomplishments at the end of each day. It was only when he came home and faced the anger, disrespect, and judgment of his supposed wife and soulmate that he fell down. Every night as he entered the house, he would tense up, remembering his plans and goals. This wouldn't last forever, he told himself. Next chapter. The first picture of the charred body was slipped under Rich's door not long after he went to bed. It was gruesome, almost unrecognizable as human. Someone had written in white marker, "Heather Patton, burned alive, now burning in hell." His hands trembled as he picked it up. How could someone do something so horrible, so disgusting? Did they not know how much he regretted it? How badly he was hurt? It was an accident. It wasn't his fault. He loved her. He sat on the floor and sobbed until he fell asleep. Next chapter. Susan was unloading the grocery truck. What should have been a simple 20-minute trip took over an hour. The kids ran into the house, each carrying a bag. It was agonizing to see the stares, the judgmental looks. No one wanted to talk to her, but the whispers followed her everywhere. In some cases, she could barely contain her laughter. Did the whole world really know about her relationship? "Hey, Susan!" a nosy neighbor called out to her, nearly running across the street. Damn. That was the last thing she needed. "Hi, Margie. So what's he like, this young lover?" Susan felt her face redden. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, Susie. You can tell me. Everybody knows. You and that young lawyer who killed his wife. Isn't that scary? Exciting, maybe?" Susan couldn't believe the bile that poured from the mouth of the neighborhood gossip. It was an accident. He didn't kill her. For an accident, he paid handsomely. So what was it then? You wouldn't have dumped Jonathan for some sad sack if he wasn't amazing in bed? I mean, really? Dump a real man for this scrawny boy? Susan slammed the back door of the car, turned around, and without another word, walked into her house. Next chapter. Jonathan hugged her as she cried in their bed. He felt really good about the way things were turning out. "What's wrong, baby?" "They're horrible. Everyone is horrible to me. They think I'm a slut." "You are a whore," he thought. "Shh," he whispered. "Things will get better. Do what's right and ignore them." Why can't they understand? Haven't they ever loved before? I can't do anything about my feelings. You still have us. Your family. We love you. She sobbed. Love? Do you love me, Jonathan? I've always loved you. Love me, Jonathan. Please, she pleaded. God, I wish I could. I want you so much, he lied. You can. I haven't been with him. Not since that last night. I'm yours, sweetheart. Still lying. Madge reported seeing her at his place only a week ago. 3 hours. At least she was lying about it instead of throwing it in his face. At least some progress. I'm afraid, he said softly. I know you're not the only woman he's been with. I don't know if he's infected you with anything, any disease. She tensed. How could you think that? I can't be with you until I know you're clean. But we've been doing this for a year now and we haven't had a problem. Thanks for reminding me. Slut, he thought. I've been tested. I'm clean. It's not fair to risk the lives of the parents of both our children. He's having fun with other women. Who knows what diseases they might have? He wouldn't do that. He loves me. You love me, and you did, Jonathan reminded her. I'm your wife, Jonathan. He pulled her to him and hugged her. Not until I know you're clean and no longer seeing him. Next chapter. The magazines began to appear. Miss Cosmo, Good Housekeeping, Southern Living, Homes and Gardens, all addressed to Heather Patton, a constant reminder. There was a large photograph taped to his front door. Her headstone. Spoiled. Under the words, loving wife, someone had written, murdered and replaced by a cheating whore. He tore the photo into small pieces and spent hours scrubbing the tombstone of the inscription with chalk until every speck of the inscription was gone. The police, who were called, found him and questioned him about his actions and threatened to charge him with vandalism. He went into a rage, screaming and crying, and had to be handcuffed before he calmed down enough to explain. They checked his ID card and compared it to a tombstone. One of the officers looked at him in disgust. Ah, you, the wife snatcher. Yeah, we know you. 3 days later, he was cleaning her tombstone again. Next chapter. Yes, I got your earlier messages. No, I can't pay. I lost my job and I don't have any money. Max Schritter hung up the phone, smirking. Third call in 2 weeks. Things were definitely going according to plan. He looked at the picture in his hand and smiled. He would give it to the boy after work. That should help. It wouldn't prove anything, but it should help sow the seeds of discontent. He looked over the papers scattered across the kitchen table. Notes, comments, a biography. Information gleaned from the bastard's home. A mass of information. For Max, it was interesting, fun, something to do. A new purpose, albeit a temporary one. Righting wrongs, punishing the guilty. These two were very, very guilty. Next chapter. The ranch doesn't close on weekends. Jonathan worked, but he took his family with him. He hoisted his oldest into the saddle of an old quarter horse. Do you really think it's safe? Asked Susan. It's been done that way for 4 generations. Buttercup is a gentle horse. She'll take care of our girl. Cindy glowed with pride, stroking the horse's mane with her hand, leaning over and talking to her. Jonathan took the bridle in his hand and began to walk around, watching his firstborn, watching her balance, pressing her knee to show her how to sit properly. He found it amusing that girls were always so eager to sit on horseback. Taking a few turns, he handed the reins to his little girl and let her smile warm his heart. She was already getting the hang of the old Western saddle, gliding along with the horse. He could see the change in the horse as she calmed down. She knew her helper was comfortable, and that made everything right. Is it your turn? He asked Susan. Me? Are you crazy? She asked. Come on, Susan, relax a little. Give it a try. With a little push, he sat her in the saddle and began to explain. She was nervous, much more so than Cindy had ever been. His daughter seemed to already live in the saddle. She led her horse beside her mother, talking to her, laughing until Susan relaxed enough to move more than a crawl. Jonathan slipped his foot into the stirrup and climbed onto the gray's croup. Patting his neck and nipping at his heels, he trotted off, and when he was near the 2 girls, he switched to an easy gait. It's not so bad, is it? Do you do this for hours every day? Asked Susan. Sometimes. It's different every day. There are times when I rarely leave the garage at all. Do you enjoy it? She asked. I like it. He looked at his daughter, seeing her energy, her desire to do more, to trot, to gallop, to become one with her horse. He chided himself for not teaching her to ride sooner. They'd been ranchers, had been for 5 generations. It was in their blood. He'd been a fool to deny it. Next chapter. Rich sat up in bed and listened. There, the crying, the sobbing, he thought. It had stopped. He closed his eyes, wanting to sleep, to no avail. When the quiet crying began again, he pulled the pillow over his head, trying to ward it off. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Outside, John took another sip of lukewarm coffee. Another hour and his shift would be over. He adjusted his headphones and listened to the bastards whining. He pressed the remote, turning on the third recording, the sound of a burning fire. "It was an accident!" he heard him yell. He gave the bastard 5 minutes and turned on recording number 1, a pathetic cry. It wasn't easy. Sometimes he got goosebumps running down his spine, and he knew it was Diana on the tape. Next chapter. "Jonathan!" He reached out and put his arm around his wife's waist. "Yes, baby?" I need some money. I'm almost out of gas." Jonathan jerked his hand away sharply. "Take it from your lover." "Please, I have a job interview at Jenkins's store." "I didn't know you were looking for a job," he said. "I'm worried about our finances. Nancy can start kindergarten this year, and I can work while the kids are in school." "You're not going to use the money to go out with your lover, are you?" "No, Jonathan, I promise. It's for gas so I can go to job interviews and take care of our kids. And what if there's an emergency? I'm on empty." He pulled out his wallet and handed her 2 20s. "I trust you. Please don't make a fool of me." "I wouldn't do that. I love you." "You've done it before," Jonathan said coldly. She bowed her head. Why wasn't Rich returning her calls? Was he really seeing someone else? A picture of the hooker from his old office, walking out of his house. He's hugging her. Did he really replace her so quickly? They hadn't spoken in over a week. I'm sorry. Next chapter. Jonathan looked at his paycheck. The 50% he received directly was barely a third of what he earned at his previous job. It wouldn't even be that much if Uncle Len hadn't given him a raise when he took over the maintenance of all the machinery on the ranch. With the money Grandpa was getting secretly, it wasn't much less than he used to make before overtime. Uncle Len talked about getting a share of the profits if he stayed on the ranch. Only 1% a year for the first 5 years, but it could be a nice bonus. He'd become a partner. A minor one, but there was a certain pride in that. He'd never become majority owner, that would go to the elder Len, though Will had shown no interest in the family business so far. That was just the way they were set up. But his mother was getting 10% of the profits from the business, and if he persisted, it might one day become his share as well. He pulled up his pants, thinking he'd have to buy new ones soon. This was the second time he had to change them. He didn't know what his waist size was, but 2 new notches had to be made in the waistband. All this work in the field was changing him. He joined the other workers for a payday drink at the Spur and Saddle. Mikey, a giant with a juvenile name, poked him in the ribs. "That filly seems to have her eye on you." Jonathan looked over at the table where 3 women sat. The cute little red-haired filly was definitely keeping her eyes on him. He caught the bartender's eye. "What are they drinking?" he asked, nodding at the table. "Shiner pitcher." "I'll take one." The old bartender nodded and winked at him, placing the pitcher in front of him. He walked over to the table and stood next to an empty stool, holding out his hand. "Just so you know, I'm not Greek." The girls looked at each other confused until a smile appeared on the redhead's face. "And you're carrying gifts?" she asked. He winked at her, set the pitcher on the table, picked up the old one, filled their glasses, and walked back to the bar with it. After a moment, the blonde patted him on the shoulder. "You're kidding, right? You're not even going to have a beer with us?" "I've made a habit of drinking beer," he explained. She glanced at his glass. Jonathan grinned. The Jim Beam, on the other hand, hasn't gagged yet. So bring your Jim Beam and keep us company. It was an enjoyable hour spent with good-looking girls. He got 2 phone numbers and 3 hugs, one of which was accompanied by a light kiss. Perhaps Grandpa was right. It was the easiest thing in the world. Next chapter, Susan's life was turning to shit. She had become the laughingstock of the entire town, being ridiculed and insulted everywhere she turned. She gave up fancy coffee and switched to Dunkin' Donuts. It was all she could afford. She waited at the gatehouse for the old man to bring her coffee. He looked at her and turned away from the window and walked around the corner for a second before returning with a smirk on his face. He handed her through the window. "One cheater's special," he said, grinning. Her hand shook with anger as she took it. She noticed the lid wasn't closed. She didn't want to think about what he had done to her. She remembered the scene she had made when she complained at McDonald's about the service. She had been humiliated and laughingly kicked out of the store, with the manager laughing as loudly as everyone else. She glared at him, opened the lid, and poured coffee. The bastard smiled. "Maybe you're not as stupid as they say you are." Next chapter. Rich was afraid to plug in the phone. He never knew when his wife would call again, haunt him, blame him for her pain and suffering. Logically, he knew it wasn't her. But when he was awakened from his sleep by that whispering voice begging him to stop hurting, all logic left him. He felt stares on him wherever he went, judging him, accusing him, condemning him. He wasn't guilty of anything. Why can't they understand? It was an accident. The little notes were the worst. Tiny reminders written in her neat handwriting. "Remember that little candy bar? Do you still have that dress? The one I wore on our anniversary? Cancun, Richie? Remember Cancun? Why, Richie? Why?" Yes, he remembered everything. He opened the scrapbook Susan had hidden, stealing his memories. How beautiful Heather had looked at the ship's rail, the hike through the ruins. God, how he loved her. And now she was dead. His fault. He sipped more from the bottle, feeling the burning in his throat. She'd trusted him, and he'd failed her. He'd never meant to do that. "It was an accident, love," he muttered, tears falling down the pictures. Next chapter. Max, the judge, the colonel, and John sat looking over their notes. The colonel had laid out a map with colored dots marking all of the meetings over the past month. "Do you think he'll run away soon? He hardly shows up in public anymore," John Crumb asked as he looked over the latest notes. "He'll break much sooner than she will. She's stubborn," Max said. There was a hint of admiration in his words. "Maybe we should slow things down. Give them both time to realize how bad it is," the judge asked. "Hell no," Max snapped back. "She wants to be stubborn. We'll make it stronger." The judge shook his head. "Judith won't be happy about that," he muttered. Next chapter. Susan wiped her face in shock. That old woman had spit on her. Spit in her face. She was sitting outside the coffee shop where they usually met. It had been almost 2 weeks since she had heard from him. She had even worked up the courage to go to his house, but he hadn't answered her knock. His car was parked there. He must have been somewhere nearby. She used her key and opened the door, but it was locked. "Rich!" she called out. "Rich, honey! It's me!" There was no reply. There was a sour odor in the house. It looked dark. Maybe he'd left. Left with that whore in the picture. Left in her car. How could he do that to her? What did she do wrong? She raced down memory lane, back to their cafe, the place where they had talked for so long. She sat there, remembering his voice, his touch, lost in her memories. "Tramp!" the woman hissed as she passed by on the sidewalk, just beyond the railing that surrounded the drinking establishment. Susan raised her head to feel the spittle fall on her face. She was in shock. She heard whispers around her. Open laughter. She wiped her face with a tissue, tears streaming down her cheeks. How had her life turned to shit so quickly? She had everything. A loving family, a good man, young love. And now? All she had left were memories and the hatred of everyone she knew. It wasn't fair. What had she done wrong? There was nothing she could do about it. She had never wanted this, never aspired to this. It was love. Undeniable. It wasn't her fault in any way. She looked up when an older guy sat down across from her. He smirked cheekily. A pretty girl like you shouldn't cry. What do you say I buy you a drink? She shook her head. No thanks, I'm married. He shrugged. I've never heard of that stopping you. Come on, let's have a drink or two. Have a little fun. You're just lovely. Fun? Was that all she was now? Please leave me alone, she said. He stood up and leaned toward her. If you change your mind, we'll be at the Spur and Saddle. Have you ever been with 3 guys? We'll entertain you all night. Leave me alone, she shouted at him. Geez, lady, I don't have a cow. Just figured party girl likes to party. No hard feelings, okay? She dropped her face into her hands and didn't fight the tears. Next chapter. Jonathan watched his grandfather put the rope in his son's hands. He was showing him how to hold the loop open, how far down to hold the 2 ropes parallel, a foot or so from the Honda, the eye of the lariat. Explained how to wind it properly, how to hold it with his free hand. Their target was a pole sticking out of a hay bale. On the 3rd try, he swung the rope sideways, then over his head, learning the timing before quickly throwing his arm forward, and the loop kept its shape as it fell against the pole. Both he and Susan clapped in appreciation, as did Cindy. Little Nancy was too busy fiddling with Grandpa's old service dog Blue, a 12-year-old blue heeler. He never remembered his grandfather not having at least one dog. They were service dogs and lived on the street, but he cared for them, and when they started limping, slow and clumsy after being hexed, he didn't put them to sleep. No, he couldn't do that. They were his friends, and no one could say he wasn't loyal to them. They had moved into the house, grown old and fat and spoiled. They lived out their days with their only master. They craved the lightest touch, a single word of praise, always by his side. Their loyalty was rewarded. Grandpa reached out and squeezed Joey's shoulder. Jonathan remembered that touch. How good it made him feel. Sloppy, but it's a start. That was as close to praise as he could get. Someday he would learn to appreciate it. He felt Susan lean against him and put his arm around her shoulders. He's good with kids. I never would have expected that, she said quietly. He's always been that way. Some of the best days of my life were here, with him and Dad. We had some wonderful times, didn't we? She said, hugging him around the waist. It was so great being together, as a family, doing things with the kids, enjoying the outdoors. Yes. It's not too late, is it? To have more, like a family, like husband and wife. He shrugged. I don't know, Susan. I honestly don't know. Next chapter. Rich stood in the waiting room and pleaded with the woman sitting there. Please, I have to see her. She must have some free time. The silver-haired woman pretended to check her calendar. I'm very sorry, Mr. Patton. Dr. Schaefer is busy to the max. Maybe next week. Oh, sorry. Next week she's on vacation. Maybe next week. You really should call ahead. I tried. You'll have to accommodate me. I don't know what to do. I'm very sorry, sir. It won't be possible for at least 2 weeks. Would you like to make an appointment for that time? I can get you an appointment for Thursday, 3:30 next week. 5 minutes. That's all I need. 5 minutes. Can she at least update my recipes? She's really busy today, trying to get ready for vacation. Why don't you go home and I'll talk to her when I can? We'll call you if she can accommodate you tomorrow before she leaves. Rich nodded slowly and turned to walk out the door, hunched over in defeat. Get lost, you vile wife snatcher, Ellen thought. She picked up the phone and dialed the number. Next chapter. Susan hung up the phone. She didn't know why she had even tried to do this. All she got was a busy signal. He couldn't be on the phone that often. Where is he now when I need him? She had sacrificed so much to help him. Her time, her loyalty, her family, maybe even her marriage. She'd come running when he called, and now he was ignoring her. It wasn't fair. Susan didn't know that blocking her calls was the easiest thing in the world. The last time John Crumb had been at the bastard's house, he'd picked up the phone, dialed 60 and gone through the menus until he'd blocked her home and cell phone numbers. Jonathan did the same with their home phone and her cell phone, blocking the bastard's incoming calls. It would be more than a day in hell before they started calling each other on those phones. Next chapter. Jonathan jerked the reins to the side, driving the stubborn old cow away. It seemed to him that for some reason she had ducked away from the gate instead of following the rest of the herd to a new pasture. She turned and seemed to be heading for the bush when Vincent, his cattle dog, bit her front leg, turning her around. He saw her shift her weight uncertainly and thought she might have an injury. It took a lot of effort to get her where he needed her to go. 2 ropes around her neck and an hour of fighting had worn her down to the point where it seemed he could safely walk over to her. A job like this was better handled by 2 men, but there were few of them that day. He could handle it. Miguel found him there, treating the cut on her leg, and slowly moved closer. He didn't want to scare her off. "Dangerous, alone," the old man said. "Didn't want her to get caught in the thicket or end up limping. Thought I'd take care of that an hour ago." An experienced eye checked his work and nodded disapprovingly. "Can you handle it?" "Yes, I'll have her through the gates within the hour." "Close them behind you!" Jonathan felt a pride in his work he hadn't felt in far too long. His shoulders ached, his hands were chafed, and he'd be lucky to get back before dark. He was happier than he had any right to be. He removed the ropes and spoke softly, soothing the cow. Vincent lay patiently a few feet away from him. He patted the young dog on the head, praising him for a job well done. "Good boy, Vincent." He smiled, remembering how Joey had chosen his name for him. His son thought the dog's coat color, a mixture of blue, black, and gray, as well as a large light gray spot on his side, reminded him of Vincent van Gogh's painting Starry Night. Jonathan hadn't seen it, but he was proud that the boy even knew who Van Gogh was. Grandpa agreed that Vincent was a better name than Dog. Next chapter. Then Susan walked out the back door of the ranch looking for her children. Her legs ached from standing for so long, but now she was with her family again. She saw a group of men gathered in a circle inside the fence. She rushed forward when she saw there was some kind of fight going on. Len's wife, Grace, was leaning against the fence. She grabbed Susan's arm. "Leave them alone!" "What's going on?" asked Susan in desperation. She noticed her son standing next to Jason Crumb, one of the boys in Cindy's class. When Joey turned around, she saw that her son had a black eye and a swollen lip. Oddly, he was grinning. "They're giving your boy self-defense lessons," Grace explained, holding onto Susan's tense hand. "I don't want him to fight." "I don't think you want him to get his ass kicked." Susan was surprised to see her daughter Cindy come out with a tray stacked with drinks. The 10-year-old girl walked over and stopped in front of her brother, giving him the opportunity to choose first. She then turned to Jason and, blushing, offered him one. "What's this all about? Cindy would rather kick Joey's ass than wait for him. They fight like cat and dog." "Matt!" Grace pulled Susan up to the railing and put her arm around her waist. "He saved her bacon, fought for her, and got his ass kicked for it." Susan gasped. He doesn't fight. We don't allow it." Good thing he did today. A couple of boys from school decided that since Cindy was her mother's daughter, she'd be easy, she'd fool around. Caught her behind the bleachers. She managed to get her shirt off before your boy came at them with fists. That's what Jason says. Jason leveled the situation. Fights don't solve anything. They should have gone to the teachers. Grace looked at her in disgust. "What are you, stupid? If they'd gone that route, she'd be soiled by now. Those little assholes would probably have gotten a lecture. Or maybe not even that. Sometimes a man has to stand up for what's right, even if he's only standing up to his waist. He could have been killed." That doesn't make any difference. You should be proud of him. To his family. Protecting his sister like that. The men will see to it that he knows how to take a punch in a fight. Leave the boy alone. This is their world. Cindy walked over to where the two of them stood, leaning against the railing and watching. Are you okay, baby? Hesitantly asked Susan. Her daughter replied absent-mindedly, her attention fixed on the crowd. Isn't he wonderful, Mommy? The admiration in her daughter's eyes never faded. Who, Cindy? Jason. The way he beat the tar out of those assholes. They'll never mess with me again, as long as Jason and Joey are around. Susan didn't hear Max come up behind her. Damn good kid you raised, Susan. No matter what anyone says about you, you can't take that away. You can be proud of your son. I know I am. She watched as her boy got up off the ground again, brushing his jeans, and one of the ranch workers lifted his hand, showing him how to hold it. She wanted to run over there, to hug him, to hold him close, to protect him. She watched him fight to protect his sister. Against the older boys, 3-on-1. So much like his father. I'm proud of him. Don't let him get hurt, Max. Please? Max laughed. He's not the one you need to worry about. The guy's got sand. He doesn't have an ounce of kindness in him. Where's my husband? Why isn't he here? Irrigation problems. He probably doesn't even know what's going on yet. He'll be back soon. The ranch won't close because of one little squabble. Susan remembered Grace's words about Cindy being her mother's daughter. Easy. Her reputation made her little girl a target. That wasn't fair. None of this was fair. Would her nightmare ever end? Next chapter. Oh God, this is going to be bad, Officer Banks said, holding a handkerchief to his nose. His partner reached into his pocket, pulled out a Vicks, and rubbed a little into each nostril. He handed the container to the younger guy. The kid would learn. They called out to each other again, but got no response. The house was a mess. Scattered papers, dirty plates in the living room and kitchen. The strongest smell was coming from the back of the house. They proceeded to the bedroom, eyes watering from the stench. Son of a bitch, sighed Banks. This is just screwed up. The man lay in a pile of photos, large and small. Letters were scattered at his feet. A bottle of vodka less than half filled and empty prescription pill packets told them all they needed to know. Never could understand how a man could kill himself over some broad, Officer Gilroy said with a shake of his head. He turned to his protege. Call it in. There's nothing more for us to do here. Next chapter. Jonathan sat with the Eagles, all their eyes on him. Figured he'd run away. Won't chicken out, Grandpa said. Get away from this house and all the memories here. It wasn't what I wanted. Maybe he really was depressed. Jonathan shrugged. It doesn't bother me. The bastard got what he deserved. You still want to go through the rest of it? His grandfather asked. Carl Jenkins spoke up. She's doing a good job at the store. It'll be a shame to let her go. You and family are all she talks about now. I don't know if it matters, but she seems to love you. Jonathan nodded. I believe she does, or as much as she can grasp the concept. No, it doesn't change anything. She's back now, but who knows when she'll try that shit again. I want to move on. Finish this. Grandpa reached out and gave his wrist a painful squeeze. Those old hands could crush a walnut. They could have made a paste out of his bones. Jonathan understood. This was as close to a hug as he'd ever gotten. It's going to be hard on the kids. They're good, you know. I don't know how they managed to get out of that bitch, but they did. I know, Jonathan told him. I'm not going to cut her out of their lives. I just can't get over what she did. For a whole damn year. Next chapter. Susan was tired but felt better. It had been over 3 months since her world had exploded. It had been hard. Excruciating, to be honest. But things were getting better now. The time spent at the ranch with the kids had done them good, revitalized them. She grinned to herself. She knew that her decision to open herself up to new things, to do all the things she'd done with Rich and more, had helped her. She squeezed her cheeks lightly, feeling the delicious pain. She couldn't take it too often, but Jonathan loved it. He deserved it. All of her. He loved her. He'd forgiven her. Last night he'd hugged her and kissed her afterward. The words came almost in a whisper in her ear. I love you, Susan. I always have. And I always will. I want you to know that I forgive you. Forgive you for everything. Forgive me. She burst into tears and hugged him desperately. His strong arms wrapped around her, supporting her. He took her again, gently, long and slow. Love. It was going to be okay. Better than okay. Next chapter. Jonathan got home early. It was cleaning time, but the morning rains had prevented it. Uncle Len knew it was an important day for him, so he sent him on his way. On the front lawn of the house, he noticed a notice for sale. The house had been foreclosed on. They had 30 days to vacate the apartment. Half of the children's belongings had already been moved into his grandfather's house, slowly, quietly. They'd been told these were rooms for those staying with them for the weekend. He knew it would be difficult. It shouldn't be. She was a lousy, cheating whore. But 11 years, 3 kids, and a few months of remorse had softened the pain a little. A little. But not enough. He showered, dressed in his best shirt and clean jeans. He looked at his tanned face in the mirror, trimmed his beard, and examined himself. There was a new man looking back at him. A better one in many ways, but a sadder one. This was not what he wanted out of his life. He returned to the living room, opened a bottle of her favorite wine, and poured 2 glasses. He set them on the coffee table, placing the papers neatly on the sides. Jonathan corrected their arrangement a second time. She did it. I didn't. All he had to do was remember her, the way she'd spoken to him that first night. Her great lover, who understood her, threatened him. To leave their home and get into that bastard's bed, leaving him in this unbearable pain. What evil, selfish bitch could do such a thing? The memory burned all doubt out of him. The door opened and he rose nervously. Jonathan, why is there a for sale notice hanging on our house? Are we moving? He walked over, took her hand, and sat her down. Baby, he said, and the words stuck in his throat. There's something we need to talk about. She looked at the table, at the 2 wine glasses, the stack of papers beside them. She looked at the papers again and finally recognized the words. Original petition for divorce. She turned and looked into his eyes. Looking for sadness or anger in them, she saw emptiness. Why? She asked, trembling. You've been cheating on me for a year, Susan. Insisted I put up with it. I'm not cut out for it. I'm sorry. She was barely breathing, her hands shaking. But you said you loved me, that you forgave me. I love you, and I always will. You were my first true love and the best wife a man could ever dream of for 9 wonderful years. The mother of my beautiful children. An amazing mother. I forgive you. I forgive you for everything. But it's not enough. Please don't do this, Jonathan. You don't want a divorce. It's going to be horrible. I'll fight it every step of the way. I swear I will. I need my family. I don't want a divorce. The case is done. It's been filed. The official bailiff will be here soon to serve you with the papers. We have 30 days to leave the house. I'm taking the kids to Grandpa's. He has a place for them, and you know they love the ranch. I won't tear you away from them. We'll have joint custody, and you can see them as much as you want. No, you're not taking my kids. I have rights. Where will you live with them? How will you take care of them? Here. I'm going to leave them here. I won't let you sell my house. Never. It's not our house anymore. It belongs to the banks. It's in foreclosure. She stared at him in shock, trying to comprehend his words. Foreclosure? How? I haven't paid my mortgage in 4 months. I don't make enough money anymore. But, but that's impossible. Why didn't I know? Because I didn't want you to know. Then she realized. It had been a divorce from the start. He was never going to give her a chance. It had all been planned. How could you spend me like that? For 4 whole months? Lied to me. How could you? I just had to remember the 2 years you lied to me. A whole year you went to bed with another man, gave him your love, your affection, mocked our marriage. It was very easy, really. She felt the anger building in her. I'm still their mother. The courts will give them to me. You know they will. I'm going to make your life a living hell, Jonathan. You'll never see them if you do this. I swear you won't see them. Where will you live? How will you take care of them? He asked quietly. I'll probably go back to Rich. He'll take me in. He loves me. She knew there was little chance of that. He had cut off all contact. Still, once she explained, You don't know? Asked Jonathan, concern reflected on his face. Don't know what? Rich is dead. Suicide. An overdose of sleeping pills. Susan heard those words, trying hard not to believe them. Deep down, she knew it was true. Without her, he would sink back into depression. She remembered how he'd been after she'd left him the first time. It wasn't her fault. She'd tried to talk to him, to see him. He was the one who had cut her off. She'd tried. She went to him. She saw him. She didn't want it to end the way it had ended, in silence. Oh, God. He was dead even then? How long ago? Why? Had she really just walked away? Had he gotten the same treatment she had? Oh no, he couldn't have survived that. Not in a million years. He wasn't strong enough, without her by his side. Maybe it was a lie? Jonathan had lied to her, trying to hurt her like she had hurt him. It had to be a lie, didn't it? He couldn't be dead. Not Rich. Jonathan held her, waiting for the shaking to stop. The glazed look in her eyes, the lack of reaction. Susan, he repeated quietly. Susan. Eventually, her breathing calmed, and he felt her snuggle against him. She began to cry, then quietly, then harder. He pulled her to him and hugged her. He's dead, isn't he? She finally sighed. It's been 5 days now. I'm sorry. I thought you knew. What am I supposed to do now? She whimpered pitifully. I think your parents will take you in, at least for a while. You have a job. You're still a beautiful woman. You'll find someone who can accept what I couldn't. You'll be able to see your kids as much as you want. I want them with me, she said. I know. Your parents don't have room. I don't know how you'll be able to afford a house big enough for the 4 of you. You don't want them living 3 to a room, do you? She shook her head. Grandpa has plenty of room. Miguel's niece will take care of the house and watch the kids when I'm not around. Grandfather isn't thrilled with you, but he's agreed to allow you free access to the house and the children. You could help me. Alimony and child support would allow it. Right now, I make less than $20,000 a year. I can pay maybe $500. That won't be enough. They have a huge house, 10,000 acres of backyard. They won't need anything. Grandpa has a lot of money. He's crazy about them. What can you offer them? They're my children, she sobbed. Yes, they are, and they will be. Why can't we go back to the way things were, Jonathan? We love each other. Things have been so good the last couple months. I made a mistake. Don't punish me forever. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm so sorry. I could never trust you again. I'd always wonder when you'd get into someone else's bed. You'd come to my house. I can't do that. I don't want to. I've moved on with my life, and it's time for you to move on too. I can't. I know I can't. I'll die without my family. There's no point in living. I hope you don't die. It will be hard on the children. The children? Don't you care? Of course I care. Unfortunately, it's not enough. Your betrayal was too deep. Too complete. You destroyed me. She shuddered, hearing the condemnation in his words. And now you're going to destroy me. Yes. Next chapter. She tried to fight him, but she didn't have the strength to do so. She was broken. Her parents sided with her, angry at Jonathan for denying her children. Over a long, agonizing dinner, he managed to make it clear to them that they could see the children whenever they wanted. Susan could have unlimited access to them. When she pulled herself together, if she had room for them, they would decide on joint custody. Dinner was held at his grandfather's house, and it was obvious that the children were happy there. The 3 new puppies kept them busy. Cindy went horseback riding every day and insisted on showing her grandparents her new horse. Joey was proud beyond belief. He was wearing everything the ranch workers wore, his boots were dusty, and the little Stetson was stained and twisted at the sides. Nancy sat on her great-grandfather's lap, happy as a clam, while he read to her, giving her time to talk. She had him wrapped around her finger, and everyone knew it. The meticulous old man had finally met his match. They were home, happy. She couldn't take that away from them. She signed the papers and continued her dismal, miserable life. There was no alimony. She made as much as he did, on paper. He didn't ask for alimony and offered joint custody of the child, where he was the primary caretaker. They had virtually nothing to share except for a few pieces of furniture Jonathan kept in the backyard for her to pick up whenever she wanted. Eventually, he gave her a check for half of their joint capital, $1,120. 11 years, $112 a year. Susan lost her job at Jenkins Hardware a week after the divorce. Times were tough, she was told, and she was one of the newest employees. She lay at home in her childhood bed and contemplated what had happened to her life. She had everything. And now she had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Next chapter. Susan met up with her grandmother. They sat in the living room and drank tea together. "You look awful, dear," Grandma said to Bridget. "I know," Susan replied quietly, unable to meet her grandmother's gaze. She remembered the harsh words, judgmental, insulting to her. Her grandfather still wouldn't acknowledge that she was alive. "It's been over a year, Susan. You need to get over it. Move on with your life. You're still young. You're barely 30. 35, Grandma." The old woman laughed. "A child. God, what I wouldn't give to be 35 again. Do you want to switch places?" "No, honey. Not a chance in hell. I would never do that to your grandfather. He deserves better than that." "Am I that awful?" "No, honey. You did a terrible thing. You can get over it." She took a sip of tea. "Did you just stop by for a visit, or do you need something?" Susan raised her eyes to the older woman. 56 years of marriage. She might have some answers. "I want him back, Grandma. I know he's lonely. He goes on dates, but he never stays long. I see the way he looks at me at Sunday dinner. We were perfect together. I was an idiot. I threw it all away. I want him back. I want my family back." "That's a lot to ask, sweetheart. What you did to him was wrong. Very wrong. A man has his pride, and you did everything you could to destroy it." "I know. I'll do whatever it takes. Do you think that's possible? Maybe I'm just dreaming?" The older woman leaned back in her chair, looking at her daughter's baby. Broken. She was broken, not a shadow of the happy girl she had once been. Still 35, beautiful if she wanted to be, with a good figure. She had once made him love her. She'd paid the price, and maybe she'd learned. Maybe. "You know, this isn't going to be easy. Getting him to fall in love with you again." Susan flinched at those words. Difficult, but not impossible. "Whatever it takes, Grandma, I swear. There's nothing I won't do. Just tell me what I must do. Anything. Please." Bridget looked at the mantel, at the picture of her with her 4 best friends. Cheerleaders, all those years ago. the most popular girls in school. The original Magnificent Five. All of them are now married. Emma celebrated her 50th birthday last month. Josephine to her second husband of 10 years. May Darren rest in peace. Her Jimmy was a good man, but this Darren was special. Amazing. Thank God he'd gone to his grave keeping her secret. She was still ashamed of that lost weekend, ashamed and excited. It was 55 years after graduation, and the five of them were still best friends. They still had their heads spinning the same way. What they didn't know about men wouldn't fill a teacup. Let me make some calls. We have a lot of work ahead of us, you understand? The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.